So I will introduce our panel here. Starting from the far side, John Su. John is the CEO of 24/7 Real Media, a leading global digital marketing company acquired by WPP in 2007, for, as I understand, $649 million. There you go. Real Media powers more than 45,000 websites, delivers over 800 billion ads, and reaches 200 million unique visitors. Previously, Jonathan was an M&A specialist at JPMorgan Chase Securities and served as a venture capitalist at American League Ventures, focused on digital startups. Mr. Su is a member of the World Economic Forum, Future of the Internet Council, the Paley Center for Media, and Vistage Global CEO Group. So welcome, Jonathan. Brian O'Kelly. Brian is the CEO and co-founder of AppNexus, an advanced ad management platform specializing in real-time performance advertising. Brian created the first successful ad exchange as CTO of Right Media, acquired by Yahoo for $850 million in July 2007, or $800 million.
Yeah, what's $50 million?
What's $50 million? Prior to Right Media, Brian was CEO of Metamorphosis, an early social networking and e-commerce site for events and venues. Brian is an active partner at Grape Arbor, an angel investor group with investments into more than a dozen technology companies. Anand Subramanian is founder and chairman of ContextWeb, creators of AdStack, an easy-to-use online advertising exchange that brings together advertisers and publishers to enable mutually beneficial advertising transactions. As CEO, Mr. Subramanian directed all aspects of ContextWeb business and operations, including building and managing a team of technology innovators, sales, marketing, operations, and product management, and new product development. Today, the AdStack ad exchange ranks among the top 15 ad-supported properties, according to ComScore, reaching 143 million unique monthly visitors. Dean Harris, fortunately, I don't have a bio for.
It doesn't matter.
But I know you were Chief Marketing Officer of, amongst others, Hot Jobs, Vonage, and Kayak.com. Right. Correct? And now with Blue Kava, a marketing startup. Do you want to mention anything about that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a CMO for hire. I have a portfolio of companies that I'm working with, acting as a CMO, and Blue Kava is germane to this one because it's a way of approaching this market that's a bit different. It's a device reputation company. So instead of targeting individual consumers, what it does is it gathers a history of devices and uses that device as a device profiling and data as a way of serving advertising.
Excellent. So I think we have a wide variety of the types of players in online advertising mentioned here. So I'm going to kind of divide this into the slides into two sections. A little bit of introduction and then some talking about the advertising space. And as I have recently become an avid reader of such publications as Ad Exchanger, I understand there's a lot of debate about some of the roles and the types of companies and what they all do. And so hopefully in that section we'll get into some of that stuff. And then the second section is going to be a little bit more ultralight, and that is, how can I, as an ultralight or a long tail publisher or advertiser, make use of ad networks and ad exchanges. So we'll just do some very quick inventory or terminology about inventory at first. Dean, would you like to explain what CPM, CPA, CPC, and eCPM?
Yeah, well, CPM is cost per thousand, M is thousand. So in other words, you're buying advertising priced on a per thousand basis. CPA means that you're buying the advertising based on some sort of action or activity. It could mean anything. It could mean a sale. It could mean a click. It could mean a lead. It could registration. And CPC is cost per click. And then eCPM is effective CPM. Regardless of which of those flavors you choose, you typically go back to try to figure out what the effective cost of reaching that consumer was.
Excellent. I believe most of what you guys represent our display advertising. Is that fair, or?
Yeah, let's say so. Well, I guess
Well,
you guys
yeah,
have search and...
Yeah, we do search and display, and as part of WPP, we'll touch basically all the channels at this point.
Okay. And direct response versus brand advertising.
So just one thing about because we were just at a meeting at Group M. So Group M is the media buying arm of WPP, controls about $70 billion in global advertising, and we were just the one insight we can give to everyone is that it's our belief that video online will be significantly bigger than mobile for several years. Even though everyone talks about mobile, the fact is that from an advertising perspective, mobile will be 1/10 to 1/20th the size of video over the next 3 years. So we were just strategizing a little bit about that today. So planning accordingly on that.
Well, I would think that you're saying that also because effective CPM, the CPMs on video is much bigger than mobile as well. So.
Well, I think a lot of it also within the agency these days is that, as great as you'll see tonight, a lot is connected by technology, but still there are a lot of human decisions based on this. And from a video perspective, it's the closest thing to traditional broadcast and cable advertising. And the media buyers on the major agencies are used to it. So they want to extend their purview. The thing that they want to extend their relevance to is video. And so they're making a big video push this year as part of the overall upfront buys that you make on broadcast television. So video will be a big, big push this year in terms of growth and absolute size. And mobile advertising will be $300 million in the aggregate out of a total internet advertising market of $40 billion. So,
and if I could just add something, that I mean the parameters for producing video online are entirely different than the parameters for producing conventional television. You can produce very high quality stuff with incredibly inexpensive equipment, edited on a laptop, and get content out there in a non-union environment, by the way. So you can get content. Well, I mean that it really matters, because what that means is that you can run your stuff without having to pay talent and residual payments every 13 months. So the parameters of production are entirely different, and then the quality of what one can produce, really with very very modest production equipment, is quite outstanding.
Okay. And feel free to raise your hand if you have any questions, and we will call it on you.
Are you going to get into a situation where clickable video is going to become important? What are your thoughts there? Is there a standard that's evolving? Is it just going to be individuals who are leading that space?
Yeah, it's still the Wild West. Yeah, I think one of the interesting insights, since we've been part of WPP now for 2.5 years, and WPP is the world's largest advertising and marketing company. It owns Gray, Y&R, Ogilvy, all the Group M agencies, Kantar, is that for us in the room here, panel, and all of us, we had assumed a level of sophistication among the agency that doesn't really quite exist yet. I mean, they're trying. We're certainly doing our best within WPP to get everyone up to speed, but right now it's still very early days. I mean, the sector in the aggregate is only 15 years old. That's still quite young in the grand scheme of media channels. So I do think that we're in the very early stages, especially for video and then certainly for mobile.
Can I throw the question another way? Ding, as CMO of Vonage, how much would you pay to know the name and address of the person sitting at home with a remote control on his TV that clicks, I want, click A and my name and address is given to you?
Yeah, I don't think the name and address is all that interesting.
Contact details.
That's not all that interesting either. I mean, I can find that person online now. So just having the information about their behavior and their socio-demographic characteristics is a lot more important. Was a lot more important to me than having their physical name and address. One of the things that I don't know how germane this is, but one of the reasons that Vonage took off is because broadband took off. So when we served our advertising, we served to people that came in to advertising via broadband. And there was a much closer match, and people who have broadband obviously consume VoIP to a much greater extent. So, I mean, that was kind of a proxy for interest in the product. But there's tons of information that marketers use to try to make better buying decisions. And I think one of the things you're going to hear from this panel tonight is that the trend seems to be towards real-time buying and selling in conjunction with providing really, really interesting and important data. And that's kind of where it's going.
Yeah, the other thing is, video is something that, you know, especially the younger generation, is actually watching online more than they are actually watching on cable or TV. So when it comes to advertising, you have to follow where the people are going to be. So it doesn't matter if you have the address of a person, you know, or any of that information. The reality is, majority of the users are going to be watching it in an online environment. And there's also the aspect of IP delivery, like digital TV. So, you know, I think just because you had a lean back environment and you watch TV versus a lean forward environment and, you know, watching on a laptop, they are vastly different situations, but still, you know, online targeting and online video is something that's going to be big, and it will probably encompass both, you know, lean back as well as lean forward environments.
Okay, go ahead.
I have a question. You said that you feel video is the main way advertising should be leaning. Is that in the international advertising market as much, or is that more of an American?
No, that's in every major advertising market. You know, the primary focus will be on video advertising in next, especially now through next 18 months.
There's a little room back here. If some of these people that are kind of behind that pillar want to fill it in here, you can probably see better that way. Feel free to. Go ahead.
So this past Friday, Facebook changed its privacy policy, and I was wondering if you know, any of you could walk us through what those changes specifically are. I know that they're now releasing new data to specific third-party authorized websites. And you know, if you could put that in context, what that means in terms for advertisers and new opportunities that creates, and then also from a consumer standpoint, what type of exposure is that creating for individuals on Facebook? You know, I'm particularly interested in the part where if your friend logs into a service, it's sharing information about you. It's not just your actions that are being tracked, it's now you're findable through your friend's actions.
It's funny, we were just talking about privacy just before the panel started, and we all, at least I think people here in the panel, believe that privacy is to a large extent a farce, right? Because the reality is we all live in an ecosystem where we interact with each other. We give out our, you know, information pretty much every day. The challenge is online, I think it just gets a little bit more scarier for people. Because it's actually logged in some server, you can kind of go back to it and find that information. I can't necessarily specifically comment about the Facebook policy, but the reality is it's not, people aren't really afraid about the data. People are afraid about the data being misused, right? So data sharing is actually helpful. We can be, as a society, much more knowledgeable and can actually serve ads to the right people at the right time so that you don't see annoying ads. But the problem is if it falls in the hands of someone who wants to come rob you or something like that. So I think it's more about compliance that people at the industry will have to work towards. I think sharing data is less of an issue if there was a good control structure to really make sure that it doesn't fall into the wrong hands. So again, I'm not commenting specifically about the Facebook. I think if you guys have read through that, then you might be able to answer it. But privacy in general, I think, is to a certain extent.
I'm really just curious as to what information is now eligible to be shared, and then, you know, what does an advertiser actually do with that information? Does anybody?
I mean, the issue is that, you know, privacy is a very controversial, some would say radioactive target, you know, topic right now. And, you know, I think for Facebook, right, they've done some very aggressive moves over the last couple of months, including not only the privacy side for consumers, but within the ad network space, they've actually pulled all their inventory from the ad network space. And, you know, the common belief is that there's unlimited supply of inventory, but Facebook represented like a quarter of all advertising inventory in the marketplace. Fairly low quality. But what Facebook is trying to do is collect more data. Now, there is an explicit opt-in when you use Facebook, right? You know, there's a whole checklist that you go through. It might be too confusing or not too confusing, but their idea is to use their own inventory, and that's why they pulled it out in the marketplace. Use an explicit agreement. You know, the quid pro quo is that you're using Facebook essentially for free, and you've opted in on all these different elements of data and data usage, and they're going to use that to come up with new programs to attract mostly brand advertisers, right? They aren't as interested in direct advertising where they're trying to go for major brands to custom tailor next generation marketing programs for their user base, because it represents a huge subset of the overall internet community right now. And I think that they're trying to figure it out themselves. I think that they took a very aggressive tact a couple of weeks ago. I wouldn't have done that, but
Okay. So that leads us maybe to the next point. Brian, you want to maybe define the difference between direct response and brand and what that means in the online advertising space?
Yeah, I think direct response is advertisers who have some kind of definable action or metric they're trying to hit. I guess brand people might say they do too. And Dean, I think you might have a better perspective on this than me.
Yeah, I
from
mean,
a marketer's perspective.
the origin of direct response is that it gave the consumer a chance to respond directly to the sale. So back in the old days, which was 15 years ago, that was typically direct response advertising on television typically included an 800 number. And then, of course, when the web became prominent, it included a web address. And now it includes, a Twitter account or a Facebook account. So what it does is it gives the marketer a chance to derive business directly from the advertising. In the television market, direct response advertising was always priced lower. So many people kind of used it as a tactic to buy large amounts of advertising at a lower price, and in exchange for that price break, typically direct response advertising in television was kind of on standby. In other words, they would sell it to you, when there was a lot of time available. That's one of the reasons you would tend to see it at 3 o'clock in the morning, because there was plenty of time available. But there has been a terrific match between the online world and direct response advertising, because it's a great place to sort of show the cause and effect of what you're doing. Brand advertising, on the other hand, is advertising that's used to build the image and the value of the brand, so then you can buy something typically at a later time. You don't necessarily buy it immediately. And it's kind of like, when you go into the store and you look at the shelves, you've got some kind of impression of what it is you're looking at, and in large part, that's because you've been preconditioned by advertising for that brand that you've seen for years and years and years.
But it only represents like 10% of the overall online ad spend now.
Right. That's been actually one of the big difficulties of the online ad world, that they've been unable to attract brand advertisers to a great extent.
Yeah, actually,
another product I'm working on, by the way.
I might shamelessly plug Context Web here, but that's, our business is all about brand advertising online. And what we found is, you're right, since it's a really small piece, but it's actually everybody's been trying to get, how do you get brand advertisers online? And one of the things that we had as an advantage is our contextual technology, which allows you to kind of make sure that your ads are showing up the right content. And that really resonates with brand advertisers, because brand advertisers do not want to be next to some site that the content is created by users, and there's all kinds of stuff that are being said about different brands. So I think the challenge of getting brand advertisers is kind of slowly going away. I mean, we've been definitely growing at a very healthy pace, but still, the brand advertisers are really not looking for customers. They're really looking for just getting the message across. So a good example would be, we have product launches that people do using our system, where there are advertisers who just want a movie like 21st Century Fox, the customer for us. Every Thursday when they launch a movie, they release it through our system. And they make sure that every person who's looking at a content about a movie or a movie page anywhere on the internet, they want to be on that page and kind of introduce their movies. So those types of things are definitely happening in the industry now. But it's still a small,
How are you tracking that back in regards to whether it's brand effective or not? Are they brand tracking services online? How's that currently working?
There are. I mean, there are companies like
Dynamic Logic.
Dynamic Logic, Vizu. What they do is they'll pop up a survey and ask you something about the brand, so they can measure recall. They can measure if you have seen this ad before online. They also sometimes will look at post-click activity on the sites. For example, once you've clicked on the ad, you landed on your site, they'll want to see how long were you engaged on the site and so on and so forth. And frankly, all of us in the industry are kind of working together to grow this pie. So you would definitely find Yahoo, Google, us, WPP. We're all trying to figure out how to get the brand dollars online, because we do believe that that's a good vehicle.
Okay, Zach?
Yeah, I have a quick question. In terms of accessing brand dollars online, do you think that a big part of the challenge is retraining planners to get outside of measuring engagement based on click-throughs and more into deeper levels of engagement? And if so, maybe you guys can each speak to that. In other words, accessing the TV dollars, the $70 billion pool of money that's quickly moving to the online video space.
Yeah, I think the challenge is actually not the media planners and media buyers alone. It's also the process that's followed. I just saw a report of a confidentially of a customer where the ROI on TV dollars was, for every dollar they spend, they were making $1.80 back. The ROI on online video and online spend, for every dollar they were spending, they're getting $6.80 back. But they were spending about $25 million on TV and less than $1 million online. So it doesn't make logical sense. But the reality is, the industry is shifting, from one to the other, and you'd never expect that shift to be that fast. It takes time. I think the bigger challenge is that a lot of TV is sold on an upfront basis, so it's all locked in. It's there every Q4. You'll find all the TV sales execs are very busy, and it's all locked in for the next year. So usually, online video is still looked at as a spot buy. It's never looked at as a premium upfront buy. But as they point out, things are changing, and it probably is going to get better and better. I mean, we are still a very small percentage of a very growing market. But he can answer that question much more.
Met with Maxis.
Yep.
That was one of the big challenges we encountered with.
That's one of our agencies, and
only focused
people act the way that they're incented, and agencies still make the majority of their money from TV and magazines and newspapers, and I think just like a lot of things on the internet, they didn't think through the model up front. In the late 90s, early 2000 period, they just kind of gave away the services as a freebie to their client, and it's hard to undo that. And so I think that within agency land, they tend to have their most experienced, most advanced people on TV, because that's where they make the most money, right? You do a creative spot for the Super Bowl, you make more money than doing, $140,000 buys. It doesn't. It's just an efficiency thing. And so I think one of the human resources challenges of all agencies is that they're transitioning. They're doing internal training, recruiting new types of people into the agency, but it's a process and it takes time. Same thing for cable. Like, cable is the last other big channel that came out, right? So cable actually always had a larger audience than broadcast as of like the late 90s. It actually did not get in prime time the same amount of ad dollars as broadcast until like 06, right? So it always takes time. It takes 20, 25 years into it. Every new channel starts off with direct response. Brand finally catches up once they get comfortable. So brand is from like Procter & Gamble, Unilever, the brand advertisers. And I think that you're going to see the same thing online. The next big push, and this is why Google really bought DoubleClick, which was really not a network. They were embedded technology that powered websites like OpenAdStream for us. They want to see that their next leg up in terms of revenues and profits will come from brand advertising dollars, because they already cornered the market, unfortunately, on the direct response dollars.
Okay. I'm just going to mention to some people, there's probably still a few more spots. If you're peeking around that column, you might want to come up here. Let's just do one more definition, and then we'll go on to some other stuff. So tell us about targeting. What does targeting mean from the advertiser and from the publisher's perspective?
Well, it just means that the impression that you're serving is sharper. In other words, you're going to somebody that represents a greater chance for a sale, somebody who represents the target audience to a greater extent, and it can be it can fill literally thousands of dimensions. I mean, in terms of behavior, in terms of psychodemographic characteristics, there are millions of them. So essentially, it's just a way to come up with a better result because you're giving a potential buyer a message that they're potentially more interested in.
How well is the average ad targeted? Like if I go to NewYorkTimes.com right now, I mean, what does that ad know about me before it's displayed?
I'm not sure if the New York Times is a great example. Probably not that much. But if you go to any of the exchanges, they know an absurd amount about you because what they're doing is they're valuing that ad based on the quality of targeting, and in Anand's case, the quality of the context. But in many cases, it's how much is this ad worth in addition to all this data that we add onto the buy. Therefore, it can be incredibly valuable.
But to be clear, they don't know you or any of us.
They know
it's the type of person that someone like you would represent.
Represents as a proxy.
Yeah, as a proxy. What you like to read.
None of us on this table will ever know anything that is a personally identifiable information.
That's
they
an
never say,
right.
I want to show an ad to Graham. It's just never going to be possible. And I think
Graham type substance.
Right.
Typically it'll be like Zip. Even if you were to do DMA advertising, like Zip +4 is what people get to at the most. In our case, we use the content as a proxy. So we don't even, really look at cookies. We just look at the content of the page you're looking at.
As a percentage of the value of an impression, how much is data?
You can answer this question better, but I think in general, if you look at it, data is just picking up more and more. But the Wild West before used to be just throw the ads and see if it works. I think over the course of the last 4 or 5 years, more and more technologies have come in. AppNexus is a good example of a company that's doing a data exchange. The more and more access people have to data, you can target better. So I think it's getting better. I'll take a wild guess, maybe 10%, 20%. I'm not sure, but it's a wild guess. I don't have the data for you.
I mean, the value of serving an incorrect impression is not that. I mean, it's not that costly. I mean, if you're buying stuff at $1 or $2, 1,000, if you serve some that are wrong, it's not the end of the world. And I guess that's one of the reasons why it's not as sharp as it could be.
Okay, let me do here.
As an advertising creative, how can I either work with all the data that ad networks have or work with ad networks to make our creative better for our clients?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that you can do actually is you can structure your ads so that they're dynamically generated. So, I mean, one side of the equation that really hasn't received enough attention is the creative side. I mean, people just sort of figure, well, gee, if I buy better, my results are going to be better. But part of buying better is being able to present the creative in a way that the consumer can relate to through a variety of personalization techniques. And there are a variety of companies now that again, self-serving because I'm working with one, that in effect will customize the ad based on any kind of data. In other words, if it's a car ad and it happens to be above 60 degrees, you're going to be served something that's a convertible. And if it's below 30 to 32 degrees, you're going to get an SUV. There are a million dimensions that can change in the creative. So I mean, you can essentially customize the creative almost as much as you can customize the buy.
You should probably also look at rich media providers like Pointroll and Flash ads, where you can actually hook your ad directly to data sources, like what you were talking about.
Okay, let's go ahead.
This is a question for Brian. We're building off of OpenX right now. Could you really quickly explain how we could integrate AppNexus? And my question for everybody else is, how quickly are you guys embracing RTV?
Well, since we're in the definitions side of things, maybe I should just step back and make sure I explain the question before I explain the answer. So OpenX is a open source publisher ad server. So I assume you're
Yeah.
running a website of some sort.
We're aggregating ads and selling to all the exchanges.
So okay. So but they're what I would think of as a publisher side
Yeah.
ad serving platform, and they've done a great job with their OpenX Market product, which they launched maybe a year ago. And it's an ad exchange that lets publishers who use OpenX, specifically the hosted version, sell ads to other ad networks and advertisers. And in some cases, what do you guys call B3?
DSPs.
No. I asked him.
We like to think of it as a demand aggregator.
Demand aggregators. And so using the OpenX Market functionality, you could, I think, very shortly be able to plug that into AppNexus and all of our clients through RTB. Now, RTB is worth talking about briefly because I think it's here somewhere. But the idea is that in the old days, like last year, you would have to decide ahead of time as a buyer what you wanted to buy. And this goes to the point about targeting, which is you could say, I want to buy people in the U.S. I want to buy people at 6 a.m. I want to buy people who have previously been to my site. All these things are very standard techniques in the industry. But you have to decide those ahead of time. In some cases, you have to call the publisher ahead of time, or with technologies like Right Media or AdStack or other non-real-time exchanges, all those things have to happen before. I'm trying to talk into the microphone.
It's not amplified, it's only from the video.
Oh, well, that won't help then, will it? I won't even lean forward. Okay, so what I'm saying is that with the old way people bought advertising, you'd have to decide ahead of time. Ahead of time could mean days ahead of time. It could mean months ahead of time. It could mean minutes ahead of time. I assume you guys could do minutes, right?
Oh, we do have an RTB environment.
I know,
also,
but last year.
Last year, yeah.
Okay. So you could go into the context web or the AdStack system and say, hey, I want to buy people like this. And the problem with this is still that those rules only allow you to define so much information. So imagine that you have much more nuanced data that you want to leverage, or perhaps there's a whole number of things that you don't want to tell your partner. And this is where RTB comes in, because instead of me as a buyer or a buyer's agent telling the publisher way up front, like, hey, every time I sell a subscription to Vonage, it's worth $30. Now that's really sensitive information that Vonage probably doesn't want to give Microsoft, because Microsoft will sit there and say, I'm going to see how much money I can charge for this ad, and I know how much they'll pay. So the idea of RTB says, well, instead of the advertiser telling the publisher their goals, the publisher just says on every single ad, think eBay, what will you pay for this ad? What will you pay for that ad? It's a live auction. And the reason it has to be real time is because the lifetime of an ad is about a quarter of a second. On eBay, I can put my snowboard up for auction. By the way, it's a very nice Burton. Please buy it. You can put that up, and it can be up for a week. I can have a reserve price, and if no one meets my reserve, oh well, I'll list it again. But an ad on the New York Times or another publisher has a lifetime of a quarter second. So somehow in that quarter second, I have to go out to as many buyers as possible and say, hey, what will you pay for this ad? And in that quarter second, get those bids, choose the highest bidder who meets my business rules, which of course gets complicated because I don't want just any old ad, right? I can't show some flashy, crazy ad on my very pristine New York Times homepage. I don't care what you pay. My brand matters more. So all of these constraints and rules and all of this aggregation of demand has to happen in a quarter of a second. That's why we call it real-time bidding. So that's a very long answer to a very short question. And the answer is that with OpenX Market, you can plug in to AppNexus and to all of our partners and clients such that in that quarter second, from when you send the ad through OpenX, and when the ad actually shows, all of our clients, people like eBay, can come bid on. It's ironic that eBay is both a auction company and buys real-time auctions. They can actually bid on this space, and you'll benefit from all of these various buyers. And in concept, that drives up the price of your advertising for the folks that are perceived by our buyers as valuable.
You guys currently integrate with OpenX?
We're just about to launch it and release it, so you're hearing it early, but yes.
We're going to try and let everybody else ask a question before we get two or three from the same person. So here we go.
Actually, my question was just answered.
Okay.
All right, go ahead.
As far as the increase in video ads you're expecting, are you expecting to see that more as increase in interstitial ads, or am I going to see it in like a 300 by 250 box, or what are you sort of expecting?
Well,
Can you repeat the question?
so the question was, in what type of video format will the increase in advertising dollars to support that video really be concentrated? And in reality, to nuance it a bit, it's really focused on, a certain. There will be three main beneficiaries of this new wave, right? One will be Hulu, one will be front page and high quality aspects of YouTube, and then single real destination things like ESPN, which actually does have an upfront. So an upfront is this annual party gathering among ad agency planners and buyers, and basically, traditionally networks like NBC, ABC, Fox, and now includes people like Yahoo and ESPN, where they'll go ahead and say, how much would you like to buy upfront for the upcoming 6 months or a year? So that you're guaranteed that spot. Like, I want to show this movie ad on Thursday nights, front page Yahoo, rest of the year, or whenever it's launched. And so most of the added advertising dollars for video will actually be concentrated in high quality, brand safe. That's a very important thing for brand advertisers. And most of the video advertisers are brand advertisers rather than direct response advertisers still, because you're still more efficient to go on search and on RTB and exchanges to get direct response advertising right now.
John, you said earlier that you believe digital video is going to expand beyond display advertising in terms of the share of the market. Kurt? I mean, this is from IAB. I just pulled it off. So it's now 4% versus 22%. Is that accurate? And then so video is going to blow up.
I think he said it was going to be greater than
mobile.
Than mobile, okay.
Like tenfold greater than mobile.
Okay. Mobile's not on here. All right, so let's
That's
go.
how small it is.
That's how small.
Okay, so we'll go right here.
I'm a real novice. Could you just explain the exchanges, exactly how the ad product, just pretend I know absolutely nothing about this business, which is what I know about this business, and explain how the exchanges work?
We got this slide up here now.
Let's just go to the next one. I think the simple way of thinking of it, and Anand, maybe you want to explain AdStack.
Sure.
And then I'll go to the other ones.
Okay. Well, so, the basic premise of an exchange is to be a disinterested party in trying to connect the buyers and sellers across, every possible form and fashion of a buyer and seller, and give buyers and sellers the control and the ability to manage it themselves, right? So the exchanges effectively play the role of connecting and creating a marketplace. So like whether it's OpenX or it was Right Media or us, our job in AdStack is to make sure that all our 11,500 buyers and sellers can connect to each other and trade. Just like stock market, you trade, except instead of trading, you're basically buying ad space. So in the interest of telling you, like there's a question that Graham asked is, if you're a small site, how do you take advantages of an exchange? Well, we have tons of small sites, and we obviously have all the big guys as well, like the top 250 Mediametric sites. I'll give you a specific example of one site. It's a kid, 18-year-old kid. He has a site called Saving for College. The kid basically would come into the exchange and set a price and try to get as much of the inventory closed. And before he's going to sleep, he reduces the price by half because he knows that at night nobody clicks. And so reducing the price actually increases his revenue. And then again in the morning, he comes back up and increases the price. So they keep playing around with prices. So it kind of gives the control to the buyers and sellers and lets the transactions happen. So typically, and I'm sure different exchanges have slightly different flavors, but typically the main job of an exchange is to decide what is the value of the page by doing a live auction and not come up with arbitrary numbers. So when an impression is born, within a quarter of a second, as Brian pointed out, you want to get every buyer on the planet give you the opportunity to say how much they're willing to pay for it, and then kind of use that as a live auction and give it to the winner. The winner could be decided based on either performance for the advertiser and also the revenue constraints or the kind of ads that a publisher wants or seller wants to sell. So that's how exchanges typically work. I don't know if I answered your question enough, but it is a pretty complex environment, but the simple fact is all it does is basically connects buyers and sellers without having a middleman approach.
But Brian was the godfather of exchanges, right? Like he came up with the concept. So what were you thinking about when you first came up with the business concept of an exchange for online advertising?
What's funny is that I think we didn't come up with the concept of an exchange. People called what we did an exchange, which I think is an important nuance, because exchange is a label that people put, you mentioned DSPs a few minutes ago. There's a lot of labels that people put on businesses, and I always get confused because, people say, Brian, you invented the exchange, and I always get confused. Like, I didn't invent the exchange. I invented this thing called Right Media that people call an exchange, and it gets confusing. So I think the problem is that if you look at eBay and you compare it to what we call an advertising exchange, but for offline goods, there's as a purist, I would say that's a marketplace more than an exchange. But I don't know, because we have financial exchanges that look very different than that. But I think it's a decent way to think about it, is that on eBay you can sell things and you can buy things, and there's some price setting mechanism that's an auction. And I think that's very similar to what Anand just said. And that's probably the simplest way for people who aren't in the industry to think about it. There's differences, for instance, that these things disappear every few seconds, and there's not such a thing as the Burton Barron snowboard. It's random cookie ID 1234 that happens to be in New York that we know very little about, regardless of what Facebook says. We don't know anything about these users. So it's a very different market, and it's also wholesale, meaning that I'm not in there trying to buy Chris, right? I'm in there trying to buy, I just buy a billion different ads today on behalf of a single client. So it's kind of like the bulk, very fast version of eBay, where things are sort of blurry. I don't know exactly what I'm buying, but I do know that things like this tend to work really well. And this might be ads on that site tend to work well for this client. And to the question about creative, well, these 5 creatives work there, but not there. And so it's this very fuzzy version of eBay where no one really knows what's going on. And man, I wish there was some kind of star rating of this doesn't suck, right? Which maybe you can solve, in terms of who's real and who's not. But you'd be amazed how many times I go to a site and scroll down to the very bottom about my fingers hurt, and there's a great brand ad, for some really fancy advertiser like Tiffany. You're like, do they really want to buy? I love My Profile Pimp. I go there every day for my MySpace page, but I really don't think that's where Tiffany wanted to advertise today. And the reason they do that is because on these exchanges and ad networks, it can be very difficult to get a sense of what you're buying. And just like eBay, sometimes people, it's hard to believe, but people lie or mislead buyers, and there's all the same dynamics. So a lot of the same ideas and concepts come to play in an exchange, if that helps.
It is. I was just, and I guess the quick follow-up is, so you're just basically buying bulk. What happens on all these quarter of a second sort of that don't get filled? Is it just blanket, or do they all get filled because there's someone going to come in at whatever the ridiculously low prices to fill the whole?
It's usually ridiculously low prices. I mean, there's no such thing. I mean, it's a virtual inventory. It's better to show something than nothing, right? So
you'll take a quarter of a cent and show it.
Yeah, but there are different. I mean, direct response ads would be like that, but brand advertising will never go down to that level. In our case, though we do support both, majority of our business is brand, so we never go down to that much. But if you were to have direct response ads, you're better off showing an ad than not. So that's the distinction, I guess, from a pricing standpoint. But to answer your question, there's no point in showing a blank ad.
So that was an exchange. What is a demand-side platform?
That will be him.
See, I don't think it's fair.
Yeah.
I think demand-side platform is an acronym that if any of you use, you'll increase your valuation with the VC community by a factor of about 10.
Yep.
It's a buzzword. You can be a cloud demand-side platform, and if you throw in real time and maybe do Twitter, I swear.
Solar-powered Chinese demand-side platform.
Whoa.
Fantastic.
Wow. I think the idea of a demand-side platform was this distinction between demand aggregation and supply aggregation. We have both represented in the room, and that the exchange is moving more towards the supply side of the market, in the sense that, as Anand talks about price floors and what we would think of as yield management, which is I can play with the price I'm willing to sell my inventory for. Well, if we're going to have advocates for sellers, we need advocates for buyers. And they're the ones who are pushing the other lever of, heck no, I ain't going to pay that for this ad. And this gets more and more algorithmically complex. And I think that's where there's some overlap with your business of, hey, as an agency, my responsibility is to my client, right? Now, Vonage being a great example from a few years ago of a company that spent a ton of money online, you know, they did a lot of this in-house, where they would be very careful about how they spent money. You know, there's a lot of different players in the ecosystem, as you saw from that previous slide. I would say the demand-side platform, whether it evolves as an ad network or a demand-side platform or an agency or a trading desk or find me 4 or 5 more terms over there, it's someone who's advocating for the buyer in this landscape. And we can call that many names, but that's the idea. And the rest of it I don't understand.
Demand-side platforms adding on here. This is a media buying platform?
Absolutely.
Okay. So let's take a question here.
It's sort of related to power going back to ad buyers. Right now there's a series of transactions that happen, and the last person in that series reaps the full benefit of making that transaction. So if I'm looking for a snowboard, I walk down to Soho, past the Burton store, and I see a billboard, then I go to Burton.com, and then finally a couple days later I do a Google search, and I click on an ad and I make the purchase. So Google gets the full benefit of that sale. So is there any pushback from...
I don't know if that's true, though. This is the lovely topic of attribution.
Yeah, this is...
And we can spend the entire night on this. We can stay up all night talking about it. But this is, I mean, Dean, I'd love your opinion on this.
Yeah, I mean, Microsoft is particularly crazed about this because they feel that they're not being attributed enough because Google gets all the attribution. Yeah. So I think what folks are doing now is that they have a variety of reasons that something gets clicked on or something gets attributed. And I think it's actually even more complicated than that, because typically online advertising doesn't work in a vacuum. So if you're running a large online advertising campaign and you're running a large offline advertising campaign simultaneously, what's the driver? I mean, is it one or the other or both? I think the answer is both. And typically what we find is that if you run an online advertising campaign and then you overlay that with an aggressive offline campaign, the metrics for the online campaign get better. As you would expect, there's more awareness of the brand, and everything's going to improve.
It's the push-pull. You need both the push when you create the brand and brand awareness, and the pull when you can drive to a transaction. And I think that the imbalance you see in this early part of the internet is because Google has come out with a very clear value proposition that states, basically, that nothing has value unless an action is done to it, like the click. And I think it's up to the ad industry in general to rebalance that framework. And that's when you'll see brand advertising dollars come online. So like at WPP, which basically only deals with 499 out of the top Fortune 500 clients and basically all brand advertising, one of the reasons why they bought us is because their business, their clients are spending, they're under-indexed, they're not spending as much as they should online. And it's our goal to try to help them get up to a fair percentage. So if people are spending 30% of their time online and getting their entertainment online and their news, we should be spending a third of all advertising dollars online. Right now, for brand advertisers, it's like 5%. Yeah. And so when I say demand aggregator, when we work with people like Brian, it's our job socially, one, to convince all these clients who are only spending 5%. So I go into Procter & Gamble and go, what are you guys doing? Spending $1 billion in overall advertising, you're only spending $50 million online. You should be spending $300 million online, $3 billion online. So that's one of the things that we're trying to really work. So it's not only just the technologies and these marketplaces where everyone comes together. It's really as much a social phenomenon of convincing brand advertisers to get comfortable with this medium.
Yeah. I think. Go ahead.
No. I mean, just sort of as a corollary, I think this is one of the reasons that Facebook is valuable and is going to become even more valuable, Because if you've got a site that attracts 500 million uniques a month, and people spend an incredible amount of time there, as they do, they're going to figure out how to monetize that, and that's going to be valuable for advertisers. Advertisers go where the consumers are, and right now consumers are going to social media, especially places like Facebook.
The biggest thing about the online advertising is that it can be measured, and it's a good thing, and it's a bad thing. It's just about how people interpret that measurement and how we change, the perception of that measurement. But it is a complicated topic.
Yeah, but I'll just give you a really quick idea. And this is done often, but I'll just show you how you find the answer, which is, for a day, you pull down your search terms off Google, you don't do search. And you check out how your sales online in Soho change. And the next day, you pull down your billboard, which you can't do today because billboards aren't that addressable, but this is coming. You pull down your billboard, and you see how your click rates actually and your conversion rates change. And the next day you pull down your banner campaigns. And people do this all the time with different, very less targeted approaches. But that's why attribution is complicated, because we don't understand whether it is that click that drove attribution or not. And it's a trap to think it is, and Google does get too much credit probably, and that's why we can have this conversation, but there's some great metrics out. Do you guys remember who put out that study about how display impacts search?
That was Yahoo, I think.
Was it? There's a couple good studies out there about this, which demonstrate the connections. I think Specific Media did one. So you can see a couple of these really interesting studies that people have done to figure out these attribution.
Yeah, and Atlas, the Atlas Institute, Young Bean Song is doing, this is his life.
Yeah, it's fantastic stuff.
Right.
And there's a new Havas one as well.
Yeah.
Okay, back here.
I'd like to take this in a slightly different direction. So previously there was a slide on the ecosystem slide where there's a lot of companies there. And clearly New York City is the center of all things advertising and media. There's a lot of startups being funded. I'm kind of curious, given that there are sort of 4 people on the panel who worked for startups at one point, or are currently working at startups, what they think about joining an online advertising business today and the prospects of it going forward.
Oh, you want to just think about, I thought you wanted to raise hands, but that's okay. We're investors in a lot of such startups. I think you are in a few, I'm in a few. I think in general, you also, I think the online world is still pretty early, as you pointed out. It's like less than 15 years. So the upside in the online advertising world is just immense. Clearly, in a dynamic world, there are going to be hundreds and hundreds of startups, and just like any other marketplace, not every startup is going to be a great exit. But clearly, I think it's something that at least I would be very, very interested in.
So you're talking about wealth building, or are you talking about like having a good career?
Yeah.
So, like I have 2 young daughters, right? I have a 3-year-old and a 6-month-old. And, I actually got into this business by accident, right? And I would tell them that it's as good a career given how competitive the business world has become on a global basis. If you actually build up skill sets within this industry, you will always be employed. Always. Because there's that much of a demand for it. From a wealth creation standpoint, I personally see, as you can see from here, it's easier than ever to get into the business, and it's harder than ever to actually get a $500 million exit. I think that's just the way that it's evolved. And it's fantastic because it's a great equalizer. I mean, the internet gives everyone an opportunity, and everyone can start, and you can start a nice little business that's an ongoing career. I think that the concept of trying to create real wealth is, it's become infinitely harder in the last couple of years.
And to add to that, I think 5 years ago, starting an ad network was really difficult because you had to go get the publishers, and you had to get the supply, and then you had to go after getting the demand. Thanks to ad exchanges in general and other sources, nowadays the supply is just available to you on a tap. You just have to focus on the demand side. So, from an investor perspective and a career perspective, as long as you're working, as he said, it is actually a pretty complex industry where if you have, I think we have PhDs in math, economics in our company, all the way to people who are creative people, and so it's a huge set of skill sets that you need to be able to really be in the ad industry. I'm sure you guys have the same kind of skill set. So I think it is a solid career path. In fact, I would say it's kind of equivalent to a stock market kind of financial world.
Yeah, I have real world. I have 2 kids that are in their 20s, and they're both in the online ad world in New York. and I think it's the place to be. I mean, I think it's sort of like having the chance to be in television in the 40s. I mean, it really is just starting out, and we think it's this big established industry. It isn't. I mean, it's only been around for 15 years, and we're probably in sort of the bottom half of the first inning. One wants to use a baseball analogy. I guess I just did. But I think it's a fabulous career choice. Plus, you get to meet a lot of really interesting people, and you tend to be judged by what you can deliver rather than other criteria. I mean, it pretty much doesn't matter, you know, what your background is, where you went to school, any of that kind of stuff. It's sort of what you can do immediately, and I think that sort of meritocracy is really worthwhile.
Go ahead.
You talked about that there's a match between brand advertising and direct advertising going on. And I was wondering if direct advertising would be a good strategy to lure brand advertisers. But you talked about creating an environment for brand advertisers, but are there strategies in direct advertising that could make that happen for brand advertising?
Well, I mean, one of the things that's interesting about direct response advertising in general is it promotes a dialogue between the consumer and the brand. There's a direct connection between providing that message and getting the sale. And what's great in the online world for everybody, whether it's direct or whether it's brand, is online really does enable that two-way conversation between the brand and the advertiser, and that's got to be good for everybody.
Let's take one right here.
From the perspective of a small, ultralight startup type website who would be looking to put ads on their site as well as advertise, kind of the Google AdWords versus AdSense kind of approach. Assuming that you wanted to move to the next level beyond, you know, the very simplistic type stuff, what would you recommend as a starting point to go beyond the Google stuff?
Well, I mean, we definitely are a great alternative. Almost 80% of our publishers on the small sites use Google AdSense as a backup tag. So all you have to do is, if you came to AdsDAC and just the self-service, you sign up, you decide how much you want to get paid for your ad inventory, and you decide what kind of ads you need, and through the hundreds and hundreds of advertisers we have, it'll be live in 2 seconds, and you can kind of start making money immediately. And typically it's risk-free for you, because the way it works in our exchange is that if you are currently working with Google AdSense, let's say, you could use that as a backup tag to us. So in case there's no ads from our exchange, then the Google AdSense ads will be shown, and so you don't lose any money. So that's if you want to sell your ad space. But if you want to buy ad space, of course, search is definitely something you want to do. But as somebody pointed out, you know, one of the big differences, search is also to use a harsh word, oxymoron, because you can't really search for something you don't know about. So if nobody knows about you, nobody's searching for you, really. So unless and until you expose out and you kind of show people that you exist, which really you can only do with display. Once people know about you, you know, people might search about your services or search about you. Clearly, if you are in a certain segment where you know it's a certain service, you can definitely use search. But display is something that you can definitely do through exchanges, networks. Even though you're small or big, we have a self-service portal. People put in their credit card just like AdWords and use it for display purposes. So you can definitely use that as an option too.
So related to that, I asked you guys to come up with your top tips for long tail or small publishers. Anything other than AdSense that you would say to monetize inventory if you're a long tail publisher?
Well, I just gave you an answer. You know, YPN just shut down their Google AdSense alternative, which is great for us because we just sent out a press release saying you're all welcome to join us. I don't know if there are that many alternatives. I know that there are a few other players in the space that do like there's this. I think Vibrant Media is a company that has these in-text advertising where they underline the words. There's another company called there's another company called Chitika that's an alternative. There are a few others, but the major players I would say is Google AdSense, and then us would be the second largest when it comes to the long tail.
Okay, let's go all the way to that.
I work for an agency, and I had a question. As far as the
good point to for Facebook taking their inventory off the marketplace of the exchange. We get a lot of publishers coming in and saying we're not on the exchange, or our mobile inventory isn't with Millennial, or whatever it may be. How many publishers do you see actually doing that, and how much of it is just sales reps coming in and being paid on the exchange? So NBC's, Fox's, people like that creating their own little ad networks. Are you seeing a lot of large publishers come off of the exchanges? And what's your take on that? What are the implications of the big clubs moving off?
I think the misconception there is that those guys were ever participating in large extents on exchange media. So I think what the way these guys think about their inventory is, if they can sell it for a lot of money to an agency buyer who will pay them a lot of money, why would they want to serve it through a, as Dean was saying, a spot market or a sort of when there's empty space market? That's the inherent idea of remnant in both TV and online, is I will sell it at the highest price I can get. If I can't get a high price, then I will find some kind of secondary channel for the inventory. So if a client comes to you or a publisher says, hey, I don't put inventory on the exchanges, that may be true. And that will change on two conditions. One is if prices rise on the spot market to compete with the premium prices, and that's a place where perhaps behavioral buying and other reasons that you don't care about a guarantee take effect. Or two, if they're forced to by agency buyers that say, hey, I want accountability for my ad spend, and I can't get it unless you let me cherry pick and bid on all the impressions I want. I think those are the two dynamics that we're going to see. To John's point, that's a ways away. And one thing that you can do is, as you think about media buying, I'm not sure what holding company you work for, but there's probably some kind of trading desk or demand aggregation desk that could help you. If not, there's certainly a lot of companies out there that can help if you want to be more creative and have more leverage over the inventory sources. But I do respect, by the way, the right and the need for publishers to sell premium inventory for premium prices. That is literally what keeps the internet free. And I would say, from John's perspective, the fact that video is growing is because it's a premium unit at premium prices. The New York Times cannot fund having 100 embedded reporters in Iraq selling inventory for $1 per thousand. It's just not going to happen. And so I'm very supportive of that model. I don't think you guys would argue with that we really want to undermine the ability of that ecosystem to fund content.
But I think another point is that not all inventory on premium sites is created equal. And one of the things that exchanges can do, either by framing the inventory differently or by adding data, is that they can take this what appears to be less valuable inventory and make it more valuable.
Yeah, and there's a misnomer that exchanges are not where you can get the premium inventory, but the reality is you can. It's a matter of, as Dean pointed out, and he pointed out that as long as the exchanges are respectful of the fact that premium inventory has to be priced differently, and that large publishers need to have pricing control and be able to kind of, even if they are part of an exchange, be able to independently own their destiny, then you can find them. And I think I was telling somebody that you can set a price. Well, in our case, we work with about 275 of the top 250 media metrics, 500 media metric sites, which are companies like New York Times and Fox News. They're all on our exchange. Well, they don't put 100% of it today, but they are changing that mentality. So you should be able to get them, hopefully in the future, through either exchanges or through direct relationships as well.
Okay, let's take maybe two more. Ready?
I just had one question. This might sound fairly ignorant, but I'm starting New Online Magazine and don't really know that much about advertising. You said one thing is, you set what the price would be for your ad. Now, do you have good advice on how you find out what are competitive and good pricing systems?
It's price discovery, right? I mean, I was giving the example of this, Saving for College kid. He would change the prices, right? So you have to kind of price discover. Tell you what, there's also price changes within the week. So for example, maybe Mondays and Tuesdays are really good for you and not, some other day. Day of the day of the time of the day, day of the week, months are seasonal. So it all depends. You have to kind of play with it. We give them tools, and I think the other exchanges also give you tools to kind of do the discovery. The one advice I would definitely give you is don't start from the top, because you will never know. You should probably start with a reasonable price, and if you're selling 100% of your inventory at a really cheap price, you know that you should increase your price, and keep on increasing until you get to a happy balance of price times how much you're selling. So that's the best.
And a company like yours would give ideas of what lower and then moving up.
You will actually see that in your dashboard, so you can actually see how much you're filling.
I mean, you can see it pretty much in real time.
Real time, so you can literally just sit on the screen and it will keep changing for you, just like a stock market ticker. So if you were to when you come in and you were to say, I want to price it at X, the system will tell you the chances are we'll sell 30% of your inventory at this price, and you just have to kind of tweak it. There's no fixed number for it.
Yeah, I got it. So we talked a lot about video today as being the premier ad product that's on the market right now. Are there any new ad products that you guys are excited about?
iAd. No, that's the new topic of discussion. Well, listen, I mean, I think at the end of the day, whether it's print, TV, display, these are all digitally being, these are various different creative formats. Video is another creative format. Video is definitely a big piece of the action, because it's a very big, already big, like for example, the creatives created for TV can potentially be reused. The internet is growing every day. There's more and more display pages, so display will continue to grow. So would search. Video might have an edge because it is, as you saw, 4% of the market, so it's going to be bigger. Is there anything else new coming up? Do you see anything else apart from the existing rich media formats and so on and so forth?
Well, I mean, at least within the agencies, we're trying to figure out what to do with the iPad, and really how to create custom types of advertisements that not only get the addressability and the portability and the location, right? Location's going to be a big one going forward, but then with the richness of the lean back with the television environment. So, just to kind of, from my perspective, over the next 3 years, we're in for a great 3 years as an industry, right? It's, now that we've passed the Great Recession, this is going to be a third renaissance in online advertising going into 2012. 2012, traditionally every 4 years between the Summer Olympics, the U.S. presidential election, it tends to be a quadrennial high, which means every 4 years advertising peaks overall. And I think online advertising is going to just continue building momentum over the next 21 months, and it's a fantastic time to take advantage of it. That's separate and apart from creating wealth and figuring out how to sell your company or what you're in it for. That's a separate idea. But to actually operate in this business right now, there is going to be a continual flood of money structurally shifting from newspapers and magazines going on to online. So this is going to be a great golden period for all of us, I think.
Okay, so I think I'll take the last question here myself. This is one of my favorites. Other than your own, what's the smartest company in the online advertising space right now?
AppNexus. No, but I mean, it's really true. I mean,
Okay. So Brian, other than your own, who's the smartest company?
No. That is not the case. I can assure you.
It's a good question. I'm going to go with Google. They're not a startup, but they have made Google Ad Exchange their focus at a senior executive level. They've done more for real-time advertising than any company, including Right Media. And while they scare the crap out of me as an entrepreneur, because I heard one of their execs say, anything that anyone is thinking about in this space we are doing, we have at least one, if not more, teams working on it. And if it's a good idea, we'll beat you. If it's not a good idea, you'll never know we worked on it. That to me scares me, and I have a deep respect for it. And regardless of the wealth creation aspect, I am thrilled that Google's doing it, and I have just massive respect for what they've done.
Okay. Alan? other than what's mentioned in the Context Web?
Unfortunately, they were a startup about a year ago, and they're not anymore because they grew so fast. I think it's not even based in the U.S. It's actually a small startup. It was a small startup. It's called ClickView or ClickTech. They just filed their S1 today, so they are probably going to go public. I knew the founders, and then all of a sudden, that company had thousands of employees or hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue. I think it's the fastest growing startup that I've known, and so it's still a startup in my mind, but it's definitely a really.
Where are they based?
They're based out of Switzerland.
Switzerland.
What do they do?
They are actually a business intelligence, company, like a enterprise software company, but they did it more like an enterprise 2.0, where effectively it's like a Salesforce.com example is what I can give you. Like if you remember Salesforce.com, just kind of took off. It's basically an enterprise software, but it really is cool. You can go to their website and just download their software and test it out and then buy it, and they've just done immensely well.
Okay, Dan.
It's not original, but I have to agree with Google. I mean, I think Google is just whatever's bigger than the 900-pound gorilla. They're doing really.
Besides Google.
Yeah, I like Clickable actually. I think they're doing really interesting things. They're smart people.
You know what? In China, Tencent. Tencent,
You can't change your answer.
I like that first one. Tencent.
That's messed up.
It is with a Chinese company.
Okay. Well, we have gotten to 8:40 here, which is considerably beyond what we're scheduled to do. I imagine that everybody's still got some more questions left. I will invite everybody to go down to City Winery, which again is right across the street, and continue the discussion. Your panelists, you guys, how many of you are showing up at City Winery? At least a drink.
At 8 o'clock I would have showed up, but I have to leave, unfortunately, at this point.
You'll all be there. Okay, well then corner them on the way out, I guess is the moral of the story. Thanks very much for